The sound of shattering crystal, sharp and final, sliced through the expensive hush of L'Étoile Noire, Chicago's most exclusive and hidden restaurant. A 7-year-old boy, Léon Varon, had just hurled a $500 champagne flute against a wall of black obsidian. But the glass hadn't just broken. It seemed to disintegrate into fine, glittering dust, and a wave of impossible cold radiated from the boy, making the candles on the nearby tables flicker and die. Tears, icy and real, streamed down his pale face as he screamed words that made grown men in bespoke suits, men who controlled empires of finance and shadow, instinctively back away. A psychic weight pressed down on the room, a palpable aura of despair and fury that made it hard to breathe. But Amara Wells didn't move. She just stood by her service station, her heart aching with a sudden, vicarious agony. Then, as a second glass flew and shattered into powder, she set her silver tray down. She moved, not with the authority of a manager or the fear of a bystander, but with a quiet, inexplicable pull. She knelt beside the broken child of the city's most dangerous and enigmatic figure. Her gentle voice cut through his rage like a whisper in a hurricane, a tiny point of warmth in the supernatural cold. "I know your heart is hurting," she said softly, her own throat tight with the echo of his pain. And for the first time in months, the little boy who terrorized tutors and unnerved hardened bodyguards simply stopped. He froze, his small chest heaving, his dark eyes wide with shock. In that moment, surrounded by chaos and crystal dust, something shifted. The waitress, invisible to everyone else, had just seen what no one else could. Not a monster's heir, not a prince of shadows, but a broken little boy who just wanted someone to stay. The black Rolls-Royce Phantom, a car that blended classic lines with a sense of eternal menace, had pulled up to the curb on the rain-slicked Chicago street at exactly 7 p.m. Its tinted windows reflected the deep, bruised purple of the city skyline, and not a single drop of rain seemed to mar its perfect finish. From the passenger seat, 7-year-old Léon Varon pressed his small, pale face against the glass, watching well-dressed couples disappear through the restaurant's unmarked, heavy oak doors. "Your father will meet you inside, young master," said Gregor, the bodyguard assigned to Leon for the evening. Gregor was a mountain of a man, dressed in a suit that seemed to be barely containing his bulk. His voice carried the same careful tone everyone used around the boy, part profound respect for his father's name, part primal fear of his unpredictable inherited nature. Leon said nothing. At 7 years old, he had already learned that promises about his father were usually conditional, subject to the whims of business and the accord. Inside L'Étoile Noire, Gothic crystal chandelier cast warm, blood-red light over tables draped in crisp black linens. The restaurant buzzed with the quiet, confident conversations of Chicago's true elite. Real estate moguls, tech billionaires, politicians, and a select hidden few whose eyes glinted a little too brightly in the low light, whose grace was a little too predator-like. They paid thousands per plate for the privilege of being seen here, and for the restaurant's legendary discretion. Amara Wells balanced 3 plates on her left arm while refilling water glasses with a practiced efficiency. At 24, she had been working at L'Étoile Noire for 8 months, long enough to become invisible to the wealthy clientele who barely acknowledged her existence. She preferred it that way. Invisible meant safe, and safe meant she could keep sending money home to her grandmother in Boston. "Table 12 needs their wine," hissed Marcus, the head waiter, his accent thick with irritation. "And the Hendersons are asking about their appetizers again?" Amara nodded, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. She had learned to move through this world like a ghost. Efficient, silent, forgettable. It was a survival skill she had perfected over years of working multiple jobs to to support herself and her ailing grandmother. Her sensitivity, a constant, low-level hum of the emotions of those around her, made this job exhausting. But she'd learned to build walls, to see the patrons as tasks, not people. It was the only way to keep their sharp, bright shards of anger, entitlement, and loneliness from overwhelming her. The restaurant's heavy doors opened, and Gregor entered with a small figure beside him. The room temperature seemed to drop 2 degrees. Leon Voron looked like any other wealthy child in his pressed navy blazer and tiny, polished dress shoes. But Amara, pausing by a service stand, felt a cold, sharp spike of anxiety and loneliness radiate from him, so potent it made her nauseous. She noticed the tension in his small shoulders, the way his dark eyes scanned the room with an alertness that seemed ancient, far too old for his face. "Master Voron's table," Gregor told the maître d', who immediately straightened, his professional smile freezing into a mask of nervous reverence. Everyone in Chicago knew the Voron name, even if they only spoke it in whispers. "Of course, right this way," the maître d' said, leading them to a secluded corner table, set in an alcove that was both private and offered a clear view of the entire room. It was Matthias Voron's usual table, positioned strategically in the deepest shadows, far from any windows. Leon climbed into the oversized, throne-like chair, his feet dangling high above the floor. Gregor checked his watch and frowned. "Your father should be here any minute. I will wait by the door." But Amara, refilling water glasses at a nearby table, caught the flicker of crushing doubt that crossed the little boy's face. It was a feeling she recognized, a cold stone in the pit of her stomach. She had felt that same feeling in her own mirror years ago, waiting for parents who worked too much and promised too little, until one day they didn't come home at all. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Leon sat perfectly still, his small hands folded in his lap, watching the door with the unnatural patience of a child who had learned not to expect too much, but still desperately hoped. Other diners began to notice the boy sitting alone, whispering behind their hands about the Voron Air dining solo. Amara approached the table carefully, her training warring with the powerful, aching pulse of loneliness she felt rolling off the boy. "Would you like something to drink while you wait?" she asked gently. Leon looked up at her, his eyes far too serious for a 7-year-old. "Chocolate milk," he said quietly, "if you have it." "I'll see what I can do," Amara smiled. And for just a moment, Leon's rigid posture relaxed slightly. She returned with a tall glass of chocolate milk, made with melted Belgian chocolate from the pastry kitchen, complete with a striped straw and a small plate of delicate sable cookies. She had convinced the kitchen to spare them. "The cookies are on the house," she said, setting them down. "Thank you," Leon said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was perhaps the first genuine kindness he had received all day. Another 20 minutes crawled by. The chocolate milk sat untouched, and the cookies remained on their plate. Leon continued his vigil, watching the door with the desperate hope of a child who still believed his father might appear. At 8:15, Gregor's phone buzzed with a silent vibration. He answered with a sharp, "Yes," then listened, his expression growing grim. He approached Leon's table with obvious reluctance. "Young master," he said carefully, "your father has been delayed. A matter of the accord. It is an emergency. He sends his apologies." The words hit Leon like a physical blow. His small face crumpled for just a moment before he forced it back into careful neutrality. But Amara, watching from across the room, felt the exact moment the little boy's heart broke. "I want to go home," Leon said quietly. "Your father requested you finish your dinner first," Gregor replied, clearly uncomfortable with the lie. He He is very sorry." That's when something inside Leon snapped. The chocolate milk glass flew first. It didn't just shatter. It exploded against the wall in a spray of brown liquid and crystal dust. Then came the plate of cookies, followed by the silverware, each piece clattering to the floor with increasing violence. "I hate him!" Leon screamed, his 7-year-old voice cracking with a power that carried across the suddenly silent restaurant. "He promised! He always promises!" Diners turned to stare, some discreetly reaching for their phones, though none would be brave enough to record. Gregor moved forward. But Leon was beyond reason now. Months of abandonment and confusion pouring out in a torrent of rage and tears. He grabbed the tablecloth and yanked, sending water glasses, bread plates, and the heavy centerpiece crashing to the marble floor. But it was more than that. The lights above their table didn't just flicker. They burst in a shower of sparks, plunging that section of the restaurant into darkness. An icy wind whipped through the alcove, extinguishing candles on tables 20 feet away. "Nobody cares," Leon sobbed, kicking at a fallen chair. "Mommy left, and Daddy doesn't want me." The words cut through the chaos like a knife. This wasn't just a tantrum. This was the raw, desperate cry of a child who felt utterly abandoned by the two people who were supposed to love him most. Gregor tried to approach again, but Leon threw a dinner roll at him, his small face red with tears and fury. The maitre d' hovered nearby, clearly torn between protecting his restaurant and avoiding the wrath of Matthias Voron. And then, through the chaos, Amara moved. She didn't rush or shout commands. She simply walked calmly into the debris field, her soft-soled shoes crunching quietly on broken glass. The supernatural cold was intense, making her shiver, and the air was thick with the boy's pain, a feeling so sharp it was like swallowing glass. She knelt down about 3 feet away from Leon, close enough to reach him, but far enough to give him space. "I know your heart is hurting," she said softly, her voice somehow carrying over his sobs. Leon froze mid-throw, a breadstick still clutched in his small fist. He stared at her through tear-blurred eyes, as if he couldn't quite believe someone had actually spoken to him instead of about him. "Sometimes when our hearts hurt really bad," Amara continued in the same gentle, empathetic tone, "we want to break things because we feel broken inside." Leon's breathing began to slow, his chest still heaving. The breadstick fell from his fingers. "But you know what I learned?" Amara asked, settling more comfortably on the floor among the broken dishes. "Breaking things doesn't fix the hurt. It just makes more broken pieces." "My daddy doesn't love me," Leon whispered, the words barely audible, a confession of his deepest fear. "Oh, sweetheart," Amara said, her own heart breaking for this small, lost boy. "Sometimes grown-ups are really bad at showing love. That doesn't mean they don't feel it." Leon looked at her with those two old eyes, searching her face for lies. But Amara's expression was open and honest, free of the careful fear that colored everyone else's interactions with him. "Will you help me clean this up?" she asked gently. "Together?" For a long moment, Leon just stared at her. Then, slowly, he nodded. As they began picking up the larger pieces of broken china, neither of them noticed the figure who had appeared in the restaurant's doorway. The entire room had gone utterly still, the temperature dropping to a deep chill. Matthias Voron, his presence a void in the room's energy, stood watching his son kneel on the floor beside a waitress who had done what no one else could. She had seen Leon, not as the dangerous heir to a dark dynasty, but simply as a little boy who needed someone to care. Matthias Voron did not walk into the room. He appeared, a sudden void in the doorway, drawing all light and sound into himself. The ambient terror of the diners solidified into a singular, icy point of absolute dread. He was tall, dressed in a black suit that seemed woven from shadows, his dark hair pulled back to reveal a face of severe, timeless beauty. He looked like a classical statue, and just as cold. But it was his eyes that held the room captive. They were dark, ancient, and held no light at all, fixed entirely on the scene before him. His son on the floor, the debris of a supernatural tantrum, and a human girl kneeling in the middle of it. Amara felt his gaze like a physical weight, a pressure on her skin that made her want to faint. The empathy that had connected her to Leon now flooded her with the father's presence. An arctic cold, a crushing weight of centuries-old authority, and a loneliness so vast and empty it dwarfed the boys. Leon. His voice was not loud. It was a low, resonant bass that vibrated in her bones. It was not a call. It was a summons. Leon, who had been calm, flinched violently. He scrambled to his feet, the anger gone, replaced by a desperate, heartbreaking fear. "Daddy," he whispered, his small hands twisting in his blazer. I didn't mean to." Matthias's gaze finally, slowly, moved from his son to Amara. He tilted his head, a gesture of pure, predatory curiosity. He was assessing her, not as a person, but as an anomaly, a variable he had not accounted for. "And you are?" he asked, the same quiet, commanding tone. Amara forced herself to stand, though her legs felt like water. She instinctively put herself slightly between the man and the boy. "Amara Wells," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I work here. We were just cleaning up." A flicker of something. Amusement? Disbelief passed through those dark eyes. He had seen the burst lights, felt the psychic shockwave from the street. He knew what this was, and he knew that this, a human, calmly talking his son down, was impossible. Gregor, his bodyguard, was frozen by the door, his face pale with failure. Matthias took one step into the room. The maitre d' nearly collapsed. "Gregor," Matthias said, without looking at his bodyguard, "compensate the restaurant for the entire room and ensure their silence." "Yes, my lord," Gregor said, his voice strained. Matthias turned his attention back to Amara. "You will come with us, Miss Wells." It was not a request. Amara's heart hammered. "Sir, I can't. I have to." "You will come with us," he repeated. His gaze flickered to Leon, who was now hiding behind Amara's legs, his small hands clutching the back of her black uniform trousers. This small gesture, this act of seeking refuge, sealed her fate. Matthias's expression hardened. He had not seen his son seek comfort from anyone since his mother left. "I will not leave my son," Amara said, her voice trembling but firm, mistaking his command for a different kind of threat. A slow, dangerous smile touched the corner of Matthias's mouth. "That was never an option. You are coming with him." The drive to the Varan estate was a study in absolute terrifying silence. The Rolls-Royce glided through the rain-slicked Chicago streets like a phantom, its interior soundproofed to the point of oppression. Amara sat on one side of the plush leather seats, Matthias on the other. Leon, exhausted from his emotional explosion, was a small bundle between them. Amara's mind raced. She should be terrified. She was terrified. She had just been borderline abducted by a man who radiated a power that felt fundamentally wrong, a man whose son could break glass with his mind. Her shift was over. Her grandmother would be expecting her call. This was a nightmare. But her empathy was a traitor. It kept feeding her information she didn't want. From her right, Matthias was a block of ancient ice, his emotions so tightly controlled they were almost non-existent. All but a single, cold, black thread of curiosity. And from her left, Leon was a tempest of residual sadness, shame, and a desperate, clinging need. Halfway through the drive, Leon's head, heavy with sleep, slumped sideways. It landed softly on Amara's thigh. Amara froze. Across the darkness of the car, she felt Matthias's gaze sharpen, becoming heavy and physical. She looked at him, and even in the shadows, she could see the faint, reflected city lights in his unblinking eyes. He was watching her. She expected anger, a command to push the boy away. Instead, he just watched. His silence was more unnerving than any threat. Carefully, so as not to wake him, Amara rested her hand on Leon's hair. It was a small, instinctive gesture of comfort. The boy sighed in his sleep, his entire body relaxing into her, as if finding a long-absent warmth. When she looked back at Matthias, his eyes were closed. But he wasn't relaxed. His hands were clasped on his knee, and she could see the faint tension in his jaw. She had the strangest sensation that her simple, human touch on his son was a shock. That this small, warm gesture was something this cold, dark world had not experienced in a very, very long time. They left the city, heading north along the lake, then turned inland, driving for what felt like an hour, into the deep, wooded suburbs that didn't feel like suburbs at all. They felt like the ancient forests of a darker country. Finally, massive, wrought iron gates, sculpted to look like bare, winter branches, loomed out of the mist. They opened silently, without a guard in sight. A long, winding driveway led to the house. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress, a Gothic cathedral of black stone and sharp angles that seemed to have been designed to intimidate the sky itself. It was vast, beautiful, and utterly devoid of life. No lights shone in the windows, no sound came from the grounds. It was a mausoleum. Amara's terror, which had been held at bay by Leon's proximity, returned with a vengeance. She had made a terrible mistake. This man wasn't just a rich, eccentric father. He was something else. The car stopped. Gregor opened her door. Matthias was already out, standing by Leon's side as the boy slowly woke up. "Daddy," Leon mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "We are home," Matthias said. He helped his son from the car, his touch on the boy's shoulder surprisingly gentle. He looked at Amara, still frozen in her seat. "Now, Miss Wells." She stepped out, and the air was cold and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth. She followed them up the massive stone steps and through doors that must have been 20 feet high. The inside was just as she'd expected. A grand foyer, entirely black marble, with a ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. The only light came from a single, dim chandelier that looked like it was made of antlers. The air was cold, still, and smelled of dust, old stone, and something metallic, like old pennies. It was beautiful, but it was a museum of a life, not a home. "Gregor," Matthias's voice echoed in the cavernous space. "Prepare a guest room for Miss Wells. He paused. "The blue room." "No!" Leon, suddenly wide awake, grabbed Amara's hand. His grip was tight. "No! She has to see my room first. You have to, Amara. Please!" Matthias turned, one eyebrow raised at his son's defiance. Leon, realizing he had shouted, shrank back, but he did not let go of Amara's hand. "Please, Daddy," he whispered. "I want to show her." Matthias stared at their joined hands for a long, silent moment. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Amara could feel the man's cold analytics warring with something else, something that almost felt like weariness. "Very well," he said finally. "Show Miss Wells your room. Then you will sleep. Gregor will bring you both some refreshment." He turned, his long black coat sweeping behind him, and disappeared into a shadowy hallway without another word. "Come on, come on!" Leon tugged her hand, his fear forgotten, replaced by a child's simple enthusiasm. He led her up a massive, winding staircase, past portraits of people with pale faces and dark, watchful eyes. The house was cold, but as they went up, Amara felt a distinct change. A pocket of warmth. They reached a landing, and Leon pushed open a heavy wooden door, and Amara gasped. The rest of the house was a void, but this room was an explosion of life. It was a huge, beautiful playroom. The walls were painted a bright, cheerful blue. Stars were painted on the ceiling. One wall was covered in bookshelves, overflowing with books and toys. A large art table sat in the middle, covered in crayons, paint, and paper. Toys were scattered on a thick, soft rug. It was the only room in the entire vast mansion that felt lived in. "This is my favorite truck," Leon announced, showing her a large red fire engine. "And this is my art table. And this," he said, running over to a small, crumpled piece of paper taped to the wall. "This is my drawing." Amara knelt by the drawing. It was a child's simple stick figure portrait. "This is me," Leon said, pointing to the smallest figure. "And this," he pointed to a very tall, very dark figure next to him, "this is Daddy." There was a third figure on the other side of Leon, but it had been angrily scribbled over in black crayon, so much so that the paper was torn. "Who's this?" Amara asked gently, already sensing the answer, a wave of cold, desolate grief rolling off the boy. Leon's smile vanished. That was Mommy," he said quietly. He traced the scribbled-out figure. "She left." "Oh, Leon," Amara said, her heart clenching. "Daddy says she had to go away," he whispered, his back to her. "But I know the truth. I heard them fighting. She said the dark was too much. She said she missed the sun." He turned, his eyes huge and swimming with tears that wouldn't fall. "She didn't want to be a mommy anymore." He didn't cry. He just stood there, vibrating with a pain that was too big for his small body. Amara didn't think. She just acted. She wrapped her arms around him and pulled him close. He was stiff at first, as if he'd forgotten what a hug felt like, and then he just melted. He buried his face in her neck and wrapped his small arms around her, holding on with a desperate, silent strength. She held him for a long time, just rubbing his back, absorbing the waves of loneliness and rejection that poured off him. And she felt something else, a flicker of power. The same cold energy from the restaurant, but it wasn't angry. It was just sad. "She was wrong," Amara whispered into his hair. "Being your mommy, that's the most wonderful thing in the world." He sniffled, pulling back. "You promise?" "I promise." He was quiet for a moment, then looked up at her, his expression uncharacteristically solemn. "Are you going to leave too?" Amara faltered. "I have to, Leon. I have a home, a grandmother I take care of." His face fell. "Oh, everyone leaves." Before she could answer, a shadow fell across the doorway. Matthias Voron stood there, his face unreadable. He had not made a sound. "Leon," his voice was soft, but the command was absolute. "It is time for bed." Leon immediately let go of Amara, his expression turning guarded and old again. "Yes, Daddy." He walked over to his bed, climbed in, and pulled the covers up to his chin, his eyes fixed on his father. Matthias waited until the boy's breathing evened out, then he turned his gaze on Amara. "My study," he said, and walked away. Amara took one last look at the sleeping boy, her heart feeling like it was being torn in two. She followed the dark figure down the stairs, back into the cold, oppressive grandeur of the house. The study was a vast, circular room, lined floor to ceiling with ancient, leather-bound books. A massive fireplace, unlit, dominated one wall. Matthias stood in the center of the room, in a pool of moonlight from a high Gothic window. "What are you?" he asked, his voice a silken threat. I told you." I'm Amara Wells. I am not asking for your name, he interrupted, turning to face her. His eyes seemed to glow in the darkness. I am asking what you are. A witch? A psychic? A fey-blooded? I'm nothing, Amara said, confused and terrified. I'm just a person. I'm a waitress at L'Étoile Noire. I'm saving money for my grandmother's medical care. That's all I am. No, Matthias said, stepping closer. She had to fight the urge to run. No, you are not. When you touched my son, he grew calm. When you entered this house, the air changed. He paused, looking at his own hand as if it were a strange object. For centuries, I have lived with a constant companion, a hunger, a rage, a beast, you might call it. It is always there, a fire in my veins. He was in front of her now, so close she could feel the impossible cold radiating from him. And when you are near, he whispered, his voice laced with a terrifying, raw disbelief, it is quiet. Why? Amara was shaking. I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. I feel things. People. I always have. I thought I was just sensitive. Sensitive, he repeated, tasting the word. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw past the power, past the cold, and saw the thing he truly was, a predator. And he was just as terrified of her as she was of him. You felt his pain, Matthias stated, in the restaurant. Yes, he felt abandoned, because you were late. Matthias's face darkened. Do not presume to understand my affairs. I don't, Amara flared, her fear momentarily eclipsed by her empathy. But he's just a boy. He doesn't understand affairs or accords. He just knows his mommy left him, and his daddy. His daddy wasn't there. He's just like you. The words hung in the air, a terrible, dangerous gamble. Matthias went utterly still. The temperature in the room plummeted. What? Did you say? He's afraid of being abandoned, Amara said, her voice shaking but her resolve hardening. And so are you. I can feel it. That's why this house is so cold. That's why you're alone. You're just like him. She thought he would kill her. His hands clenched, his eyes narrowed, and a low, animalistic growl rumbled in his chest. But then, he deflated. The rage vanished, replaced by a vast, empty ocean of weariness. My maker, he said, his voice a bare whisper, turning to stare out the window. The one who gave me this eternity. He abandoned me, left me, a fledgling, to be hunted by mortals in a world I didn't understand. I learned, in that first decade of fire and agony, that all attachments are a liability. Love, affection. They are merely weapons that your enemies have not yet found a way to use against you. He turned back, his face a mask of cold tragedy. His mother proved me right. She left us both. He looked at Amara, and she saw the truth. This ancient, powerful, terrifying creature was, underneath it all, that same abandoned fledgling, still running, still fighting, and still desperately, hopelessly alone. You're not afraid for him, Amara whispered, the realization dawning. You're afraid because of him, because you love him, and you're terrified he'll be used against you, or that he'll leave you too. Matthias said nothing. He simply stared at her, his dark eyes a swirling vortex of 1,000-year-old pain. You cannot go back to your life, Miss Wells, he said finally, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. It was a statement of fact. What? Amara's blood ran cold. You have seen my son's power. You have seen me. You are a security risk, a loose end. You're going to kill me, she whispered, her hands clenched. No, he said, and the exhaustion in his voice was palpable. I am offering you a job. Amara blinked. A job? My son needs you. This Warmth, this quiet you bring. He thrives on it. And I, he hesitated, as if the words were poison. I require it. You will stay. You will be his companion, a governess, a guardian. You will live here under my protection. You will have anything you desire. Money for your grandmother, comfort, safety, anything. Anything, Amara repeated, except my freedom. Freedom, Matthias said, a bitter, hollow sound, is an illusion. You will be safe here. The world outside is not. And now that you know of us, it is more dangerous than you can ever imagine. He left the or else unsaid. It hung in the air between them, cold and sharp as a blade. Amara looked at the dark, tragic, powerful man in front of her. She thought of the cold, empty house that was a monument to his fear. And then she thought of the one warm room, bright with painted stars, and the little boy sleeping there who had lost his mother and was terrified of losing his father. She was trapped, standing at the crossroads of the normal and the impossible. And she knew, with a sinking, aching certainty, that her life, the one she knew, was already over. The days bled into weeks, and the weeks into a strange, dreamlike rhythm. Amara's life, once her own, now orbited the two dark stars of the Voron family. Her job was all-consuming. Matthias had been true to his word. A vast sum of money, enough to secure her grandmother's care in the best private facility in Boston, had been deposited into an account in her name. She was a gilded prisoner, trapped in a cold Gothic fortress. But the fortress was beginning to thaw. Amara's presence was a quiet rebellion of life. She had coaxed Gregor to bring her soil and seeds, and now pots of vibrant green herbs lined the cold stone sills of the kitchen, their scent battling the ancient dust. With the timid blessing of the household's silent, wraith-like staff, she had begun to bake. The scent of chocolate chip cookies, a smell so aggressively normal it was almost violent in this house, now wafted through the lower halls. Leon was her shadow. He was, she discovered, a bright, fiercely intelligent boy beneath his layers of trauma. With Amara as his constant, his emotional volatility stabilized. The outbursts of power lessened, replaced by a flood of questions about the outside world. They read books from his vast library, built elaborate pillow forts in the grand ballroom, and spent hours at his art table. Her relationship with Matthias remained a tense, orbiting dance. He was often absent, consumed by the accord and the management of his vast, unseen empire. But when he was home, he watched her. She would look up from a book to find him standing in the doorway, his dark eyes tracing her every move, his expression a mixture of profound curiosity and deep-seated caution. He was, she realized, studying her. He smiled today, she told him one evening, finding him in his study, staring into the unlit fireplace. Matthias turned. Smiled? Leon. I was trying to teach him how to juggle. I'm terrible at it. He said I looked like a confused penguin. A small smile touched her own lips. He laughed. A real, actual laugh. Matthias was silent for a long moment. He has not laughed since his mother. He took a step closer, the cold, metallic scent of him enveloping her. This light you bring, Amara, it is a dangerous thing. Kindness isn't dangerous, she replied softly. In my world, he countered, his voice a low rumble, it is the most dangerous thing of all. It is a promise of warmth in an eternal winter. A promise that can be broken. His gaze was so intense it felt physical. He was not just speaking of Leon. He was speaking of himself. Her empathy, once a burden, was becoming a shield and a compass. She could feel his constant, tightly coiled control, the beast he kept leashed, and the aching void of his loneliness. But lately, she felt something new, a thread of possessive, dangerous protectiveness. It was aimed not just at his son, but at her. The shift came on a dark, rainy Tuesday. Matthias had been agitated for days, his presence like a storm cloud in the house. He found her in the conservatory, where she was showing Leon how to repot a fern. "You will not leave the estate," he commanded, his voice sharp, abrupt. Amara stood, brushing soil from her hands. "We never leave the estate." "I am serious, Amara." He crouched, putting his hands on Leon's small shoulders. "Leon, you will obey Amara in everything. You will not leave her side. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Daddy," Leon said, his eyes wide at his father's rare, open display of urgency. Matthias looked at Amara, and for a second, his mask of control slipped. She saw raw, primal fear. "There are rivals," he said, his voice low. "The Obsidian Covenant. They believe that which is different is a weakness. They see you, your humanity, as a contamination. A leverage point." "Leverage?" Amara's blood ran cold. "They believe I have an attachment." He straightened, his mask back in place. "An unfortunate perception. I must go. The Accord has been summoned. I cannot refuse. Gregor and the guard will be on high alert. Do not let him out of your sight." He turned and was gone, not waiting for a reply. The silence he left behind was heavy, oppressive, and filled with a new, sharp-edged dread. The attack came just after dusk. The storm that had threatened all day broke with a vengeance, lashing the house with wind and rain. Amara and Leon were in his playroom, the safe room, the one place that felt like hers. They were building a city out of wooden blocks. Then the lights went out. Not a flicker. They were extinguished. The entire house plunged into an absolute, inky blackness. And the emergency power did not kick in. "Amara?" Leon's voice was a small, trembling thing in the dark. "It's okay, sweetheart," Amara said, her heart hammering. "It's just the storm." But it wasn't. She could feel them. Below, in the foyer, she felt a series of cold, sharp pinpricks of emotion, arrogance, malice, and a cold, focused hunger. Shouts echoed from downstairs, a sound like a statue being toppled. A single wet scream abruptly cut off. "Amara, I'm scared," Leon whispered, and the air around them grew frigid as his own power reacted to his fear. A few of his toys began to float. "I know. Me too." Amara grabbed his hand. "We're going to hide. Now." She pulled him toward a large, built-in closet where he kept his old toys. "Get in. Be quiet. Do not make a sound, Leon. Do not think a sound. Understand?" He nodded, tears in his eyes, and scrambled inside. Amara closed the door, leaving it open just a crack, and backed away, grabbing the heaviest thing she could find, a large, porcelain-headed doll, and crouched behind the art table. The playroom door burst open. It didn't just open. It was torn from its hinges and thrown across the room. Two figures stood in the doorway. They were tall, like Matthias, but where he was shadow, they were blatant menace. Their eyes glowed a faint, sickly red in the darkness. "Well, well. This is the room," one of them, clearly the leader, said. His voice was like gravel. "The human nest." He was tall and gaunt, with a cruel, aristocratic face. He saw Amara immediately, and a slow, mocking smile spread across his lips. "So, this is the pet, the little mortal weakness that has the great Matthias Veron so distracted." "Get out," Amara said, her voice shaking as she held the doll like a club. The vampire, whom his companion called Kincaid, laughed. "Pathetic." He took a step in, his eyes scanning the room. "Where is the boy? He is not in his bed. He is not in his study. He must be with his nanny." "He's not here," Amara spat, trying to project pure confidence. But her empathy was betraying her, flooding her with his emotions, a chilling blend of sadistic amusement and ancient, bored cruelty. "Oh, I think he is," Kincaid said. He tilted his head, listening. "I can smell his fear." He moved toward the bed. Amara, desperate, threw the doll. It flew through the air and Kincaid caught it inches from his face without even looking, his smile widening. Childish. He crushed the porcelain head in his fist. "Now, the boy," he said, turning, his gaze sweeping. He saw the closet. "No," Amara whispered. He started walking toward it. "Come out, little heir. We are here to re-educate you, to teach you what it truly means to be one of us, not this watered-down, human-coddled thing you have become." He reached the closet. He put his hand on the door. "No!" Amara screamed. And as Kincaid pulled the door open, revealing the terrified, sobbing child within, Amara did not run. She did not cower. She acted. She lunged forward, placing herself between the vampire and the boy. She had no fangs, no claws, no ancient power. She had only one thing. As Kincaid raised his hand to backhand her across the room, she looked him dead in the eyes and pushed. She took every ounce of her own terror, her protective rage for the boy, her agony at being trapped. And, most potently of all, she grabbed the white-hot psychic agony pouring off Leon and projected it, like a lance, directly into the vampire's mind. Kincaid stopped. Vampires, she learned in that instant, were creatures of cold, controlled emotion. Their rage was cold. Their hunger was cold. They had not felt hot, searing, mortal, human feeling in centuries. This was not a physical attack. It was a psychic sunburn. The vampire was suddenly hit with the crippling, illogical terror of a human woman, the white-hot, selfless fury of a mother protecting her young, and the raw, world-ending abandoned grief of a 7-year-old boy. It was agonizing. It was the son his mother had fled. Kincaid staggered back, clutching his head. He screamed, a real, high-pitched scream of pure, psychic pain. His companion, hit by the same emotional shockwave, stumbled, his red eyes wide with confusion, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of feeling he had no defense against. "What is this?" "Sorcery," Kincaid snarled, his knees buckling. But the moment was broken. A blur of motion, colder and darker than the night, erupted from the hallway. Matthias was back. He was not the cold, controlled man from the study. This was the king. His eyes were not dark. They were burning black pits of absolute fury. The beast was fully unleashed. The fight was not a fight. It was an execution. The second vampire didn't even have time to turn before Matthias's hand punched through his chest. The Covenant leader, Kincaid, still reeling from Amara's psychic assault, raised his hands, but Matthias was on him. It was a whirlwind of black shadow and brutal, silent violence. A sound of breaking stone. A final, gurgling sigh. And then, silence. The room was wrecked. 2 piles of ash, and dust lay smoldering on the bright blue rug. Matthias stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving. He was terrifying, a true monster. He turned, his black eyes still burning, and looked at the closet. Amara was still standing in front of it, shaking so violently she could barely stand, Leon clinging to her legs, sobbing into her trousers. Matthias moved toward them. He was covered in dust. Amara flinched, pulling Leon behind her. Matthias stopped. The black fire in his eyes died, replaced by something she had never seen before. Raw, unshielded awe. He had seen it. He had felt her psychic assault even as he ran down the hall. He had seen her, a fragile human, bring the ancient, cruel Kincaid to his knees. He didn't speak. He simply reached out and pulled them both, Amara and Leon, into his arms, crushing them against his cold, solid chest. He held them, his head bowed, one hand tangled in her hair, the other pressed firmly against his son's back, as if anchoring himself to them. He was trembling. The great, ancient, cold as stone Matthias Veron was trembling. "They called you a weakness," he whispered, his voice rough, muffled in her hair. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his dark eyes clear and piercing, all artifice gone. An attachment. A leverage point. He cupped her face, his thumb tracing the tear track on her cheek. He was wrong. You are not a liability. You are our fortress. Years passed. The garden at the Voron estate, once a barren sculpted collection of thorns and stone, was now alive. Roses, in defiant shades of red and white, climbed the Gothic walls. A large oak tree, once bare, now held a simple wooden swing. Sunlight, real, warm, unapologetic sunlight, streamed onto the grass. A boy of 11, pale but healthy, with his father's dark hair and his own serious eyes, sat on a bench, a sketchbook in his lap. He was concentrating, his tongue sticking out slightly as he drew. Amara sat beside him, her head resting on her husband's shoulder. Matthias, no longer in his severe black suits, wore a simple, dark cashmere sweater. His arm was wrapped tightly around her. He was watching his son, and the smallest, most impossible trace of a smile touched his lips. "It's done," Leon announced, holding up the drawing. It was the same picture he had shown her all those years ago, a stick-figure family. But it was different now. The tall, dark figure of his father, the smaller figure of himself. And standing between them, her hand held by both, was Amara. The scribbled-out, angry black crayon was gone. The page was clean. "It's perfect, Leon," Amara said softly. "It's us," Leon said, a simple statement of fact. "Yes," Matthias said, his voice a low, warm rumble. "It is us." In that moment, Amara reflected on the night that had changed her life. The terror, the cold, the impossible bargain. She had come to this house as a prisoner, a job taken under duress, a gilded bird in a cold, empty cage. But something else had happened. This family of broken pieces, a boy who felt too much, and a father who felt nothing at all, had needed something she had. Not just her empathy, but her simple, human kindness. The story taught them all a lesson that night, a truth that echoed from the walls of the shattered restaurant to the warm, sunlit stones of the garden. It taught them that monsters and men are not so different. Both are shaped by their pain, and both can be healed by their connections. It taught them that true strength is not the absence of fear or weakness, but the courage to protect what you love, despite your fear. And it taught them the most important lesson of all, that family is not defined by the blood you share, but by the choices you make. It is not about who you were born to, but who you are willing to fight for. It is about seeing the brokenness in someone else, and choosing to kneel in the wreckage with them, and whispering, "I know your heart is hurting." It was a lesson that proved, in the end, that compassion was not a human weakness. It was the most powerful and most universal magic of all.